Welcome to the Visible Art of Translation podcasts. This series of podcasts are part of the EU-funded INCREC project. Our focus is creativity, translation and technology in literary and audiovisual translation. Our goal with this series is to give visibility to the often invisible skills, role and voice of professional translators.
So welcome everyone to this year's Christmas special of the Visible Art of Translation. I'll be talking once more to the principal investigator of this project, now Professor Anna Guerberov-Arenas, and to the 3 PhD students involved in this project, Kio Gerrits, Xiaolu Wang, and Nastya Shaboltos. Last year we got to know you and your research ideas. Today we will find out how your projects have developed and what you have discovered so far. So welcome all to this very special edition of the podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Last year, you all shared what motivated you to start your PhD. Looking back now, how has your project developed over the last year? Nastya, could you answer that for me?
Yes, sure, with pleasure. There have been many things happening since our last podcast, and I have been busy with analyzing data, writing the results up, and also presenting my results. So I think during the past year, I got a deeper and broader picture of the translation process, creative process, what translators think when they translate. And I just got more, I would say, more interested in the experiences of translators, how they really, how they approach translation. And maybe I can tell more when answering next questions.
And how about you, Kio?
Yeah, I think something similar to what Nastya said in the sense of expanding your research and what you're doing. I finished my first article and I went to a conference in Geneva in July, which was amazing. It was very nice to be there and I had a lot of fun talking to others. I've also started the kind of second part in that sense. So I've been looking for materials, been setting up the experiment, contacting translators, making sure everything is there. So that's been really exciting, I think, to start a new thing as well within this project and to work on it. And I hope to publish the online survey part relatively soon. But yeah, I think indeed just this deepening and broadening of the project and the research and getting a better understanding of not only what I'm researching, but also what we're all working on. So that's been nice.
Sounds good. And how about you, Xiaolu?
Yes, I also agreed what Kil and Nastya said, especially Nastya and I were working similarly in work package 1. And I remember at the end of 2024, I was just finishing my data collection. But now I'm in the process of writing and finalizing the articles in the first work package and also preparing for the second one. And I think the biggest change between 1 and 2 is that we are taking charge gradually rather than relying on others. So we are being more independent.
Okay, and Anna, how did the project develop over the last year in your eyes?
Well, I think the idea was to have the first work package of the whole project that lasts for 5 years. And I think we are in the process of finishing up. So it was nice to see indeed that some of the questions that I had initially asked myself when I asked for the grant were partially answered in this work package 1. So our goal was to create a framework of creative stages, and this has been partially created. Of course, we have more data to analyze, but we see that indeed there is a framework that can be applied to the creative process.
Very interesting.
And very interesting. And we also see some factors, let's say, for example, emotional factors that influence or that we see in translators. So I think this has been interesting personally for me. And when I have been to conferences to explain our preliminary findings.
Yeah, and you have been to many.
And I've been to a few, especially in the autumn. The biggest maybe or the most satisfying aspect is that translators who are in our main target audience, and companies and other translation scholars have been really interested in this. So sometimes in research you work a little bit in the dark. You don't know if the question that you have is also interesting for other people. So it's nice to see that indeed, yes, people do find it interesting, and that we are beginning to see something that in the beginning, when I was applying for the grant, I thought, is this even possible to measure?
I can understand. You learn so much during the process of a big project, you know? And I'm very curious, could you share one highlight or important milestone from your research this year or the project, Anna?
Well, I think what I just said, the creation of the framework, but as also Kio mentioned, for example, going to a conference or conferences with the PhDs, this is also very nice to see your team presenting high quality presentations. So this is also nice to see that you are seeing the development of people within the project.
Yeah, that's very nice. Everybody grows in the project.
Yeah, people grow and understand what research is about. And a lot of people also came to me to say, oh, your students presented very well. Well, students, staff or students, PhDs, presented very well. And I understand now what the project is about, because a lot of people maybe heard that there was this project called INCREC, but until they don't see the data, they don't have the full picture.
I understand. And how about you, Shalou? Could you share one highlight or important milestone from your research past year?
Well, Lisette, if you ask me now, to be honest, I don't have a very specific milestone for me, but I think it's more of a process of learning, just as Anna said before, and having a grow up, having better academic abilities. So for example, when I finally finished a presentation in a conference, I didn't feel that I suddenly achieved something after finalizing the presentation, but I definitely enjoyed doing that. And I also know that in this 1.5 years, I gradually became a better researcher. So that is kind of a milestone for me.
Yeah, but that's a beautiful milestone, right? Okay, and I'm also very curious about the challenges and lessons, because every research journey has its ups and downs. What has been your biggest challenge this year, and what did you learn from it, Kio?
Well, I think in every research journey there is indeed its ups and downs, as you said. I think one of those things you know but not always realize is the work and effort that goes into setting up a thing, choosing the right materials, in my case, choosing the right texts. There are, of course, so many different English texts, which what I was looking for in the first part of the year. But to make sure these texts are creative enough and interesting enough and not too long, not too short, understandable enough.
Very specific.
The thing. Yeah, so you have to really think about these things. And sometimes when you're reading an article, you're like, oh yeah, of course they chose 20, 40, 50 items for people to look at. And you're like, yeah, sure, that makes sense. But to actually come up with them and then make sure we have good translators. We, of course, always want to use professional human translators to make sure the machine translation version is up to date and good. We need annotations, of course. So all this setting up in details, and also in the actual survey, like how are you going to instruct people? How do we want to gather participants? What kind of participants? So this kind of detailed setup, I think, is always, it costs more time than you always expect it to. Also, it is, of course, very important to just be very specific with it, because if your basis is solid, the rest will also be more easy to work with and analyze and interpret.
Very important point.
Yeah, so I think that's been I wouldn't really call it challenge, but more the surprising part of things that took longer than I had initially expected it to. But yeah, and I think as Shalou also said, there's just a lot of things you learn by doing it, really, with presentations, analysis, setup, or working together also with other researchers, which I've done this year for the first time, which was very fun. So in that sense, I think there was a lot of lessons learned for all of us.
It's very beautiful. How about you, Nastya? Do you have a specific example or?
Well, I can't pinpoint one specific challenge during this year, but I can really relate to Kio's thoughts about how it can be harder to design carefully an experiment with having all these small things in mind. And I would also add something more maybe a bit more general in terms of the keeping a bigger picture in mind when doing research, because in academia there are many small tasks, smaller tasks we have to accomplish, and also we try to be very careful with every step. But as Anna mentioned, our goal was to create a framework of the creative process, one of the goals. So for me, it was a bit of a challenge not to forget about this goal of the project I do, while I'm busy with analyzing different types of data and also going into the data. So why am I doing this and what's the main goal is what I find sometimes hard to keep in mind.
And being a researcher is always juggling different tasks, and you have to prioritize them. So yeah, I understand also the challenges, but also the highlights, the milestones. A different question. So we've had this podcast now for almost 2 years. And we've had lots of interesting interviews and discussions during those years with translators. But one of the difficult questions we asked the translators is one on the definition of creativity. Have your own ideas on creativity changed, both in the sense of its definition, but also its importance for translators and translations? Anna, I'm very curious about your thoughts about this.
I think my ideas have not changed, but they have been enriched in a way. So you have, I have read quite a bit about creativity, the creative process, creativity in machines, creativity in humans. And it's funny when people talk about it from a very sometimes intuitive aspect of it, not because they have read about it, but because they actually do it. A lot of the times it coincides with what you have read, but it gives it a bit more color to the definitions. So, for example, they might say, I like to play with these concepts. And then you get this idea of play as a part of the creative process, that in a way you play as a child, is being creative. And this brings you joy, but at the same time, options. So little things like this, that you hear people in the podcast saying, that illuminates in a way your own definitions, and it might give you ideas then on how to approach research or the next work packages, what to ask them, and how to understand what we mean by being creative, both technically, so the actions, but also the thoughts and the emotions.
You actually bring together the field of translation together with research, and that's a very beautiful combination, I think.
Yeah, because, translation is very empirical, it's a craft, and research in translation tends to base itself very much on empirical practice, because, that's what it is. It's not that much theoretical, although, of course, there is a theoretical component.
Mm-hmm. And how about you, Guillaume?
Well, yeah, I was also thinking about this idea of play, because that's what I noticed in my own recordings, but also if you listen to the other podcast episode, that a lot of translators talk about creativity in this kind of concept of play. And what I found interesting about that is this idea of not only not knowing necessarily what the end is going to be, just playing around and see what you'll end up with, but also with this conceptualization of creativity as play, this idea of needing to have the time and space to play around in, that if people feel really constrained in their work in whichever way, that there's much less space for creativity because there's much less space for display. I really liked in this kind of metaphor or conceptualization of creativity to have this thing of play. So yeah, and I think indeed, as Anna said, it is kind of talking to people really enriches your idea of creativity, because it's such a broad concept, and instinctually people think they know what it means, but once you have to kind of articulate that, it becomes really difficult. So it's nice to see how people who are actually very creative in their day-to-day job, how they envision this and think about this, also how they try to conceptualize this. So I think for me, definition of creativity is indeed very difficult. Also, if I hear myself back in the interviews, I change it every single time I say it a little bit. Sometimes it's playing something new, emulation kind of things. But I think there's a lot of things going on that kind of revolve around the same core of creating something new and useful and perhaps something intentional.
And Nastya, can you maybe
So I was thinking about this a lot, and what I noticed that on the one hand I have learned a lot about creativity, both from literature and from the participants I worked with, but at the same time the concept itself got so much broader. Then nowadays I'm a bit hesitant to give a definition to this concept because, as I said in the beginning, I'm more curious about experiences of the translators. And what I noticed when I interviewed the translators, for example, is that they approach the translation task very differently. So for some of them, it's really important to focus on this expression of themselves in the world, to be curious, be open. And others are more, I would say, pragmatically oriented. I don't say they are not creative, but they just approach translation more as a job. So I also found it interesting how the concept itself plays such a different role in the lives of professionals. But I also noticed that, again, if we can't just approach sometimes creativity with a specific set of criteria because it can mean so many different things for everyone.
So to summarize, the more you know about creativity, the harder it is to give a solid definition of creativity within the translation process.
Well, maybe you can give a definition, but it will vary very much on the domain. You know, translation will be different than a writer. But at the same time, it could have a lot of things in common.
Yeah.
So I was listening this morning to the Argentinian writer, he's dead, but there are recordings, Julio Cortázar, and he was talking about the notion of play in his writing and why this connection to the creative self when you are a child. So, you know, there are many communalities, but at the same time, like Nastya says, everyone has different approaches to even the work as a writer. So
That makes it beautiful.
yeah, but I think we do see communalities. So I would say that it's our job to find not to get lost in the data, but to find these communalities while at the same time being aware that, you know, we analyze people and people, as opposed to raw data, say, for example, in natural language processing, well, are very complex beings. So it's difficult, yeah.
Yeah, I see. And we have also talked about AI in creativity and translation. Has your view on the role of AI in creativity changed over the past year, Shalu?
Yes, before I thought translators were very against Gemini or machine translation, but actually many of them use AI during the translation process after I interviewed them and saw what they were doing when they were translating. But they were not using AI for translation. They use AI more for give them ideas, and they never fully trust what AI says.
That's very good to be skeptical about it.
So I would say some of them are using AI in a very critical way. I think that is.
How about you, Kio?
No, yes, I agree. I think largely what Shalu had said, I find it interesting to see with the translators I interviewed that most of them were quite wary of AI, mainly for the consequences it could have for both their own jobs, but also the literary field, in the sense that the translations might get more monotonous because it has this AI voice, AI style. But at the same time that they are, I would say, warming up to this idea of using AI as a research tool to, for instance, for Realia, to find certain things that don't exist in a certain culture and to find a way to make that understandable or see what the possibilities of certain cultural practices are. So I think that's an interesting part now that AI is also being used for that. But indeed, I don't see a lot of translators, or I haven't heard a lot of translators talking about using AI for translations. Also because that's their enjoyment comes from thinking up of these creative solutions and these creative ideas, and you don't want that kind of taken over by AI. As I think many translators have said on the podcast, they want AI to do the boring jobs, the administration kind of things, the washing up of things, not the actual creative parts of things. So I think that is something that's been like a main kind of theme throughout these podcasts, that even though AI does offer a lot of possibilities for research or brainstorming or coming up with new ideas and new things, the actual translation work is still being done by the translator largely themselves, and they do kind of fear at times how AI will change the workforce and the industry mainly.
Yeah, I understand those worries of the translators. And so I think the podcast brought us a lot in that perspective. Right?
Maybe can I say something about AI? I'm not very fond of the term AI, as I think I have said this on many occasions in the past, especially because translations and translators have been exposed to machine translation for a long, long time. So if you consider MT, so machine translation, to be AI, this is not a new thing for translators. And translators in general, and I have interviewed many in all the years of research, are quite open to technology because they have been affected by technology much more than other professions for a long time. And they have been testing this for a long time. So I feel that this new AI, let's say, bubble that has been created since the release of ChatGPT in 2022 distracts us from the real issue, which is how much has this machine translation or automation improved the translation quality and the translation process. And if you talk to people, it has improved a lot, the quality, but not to the point where this process is fully automated, as you might, are led to believe in the media. So even applying AI to the translation industry, it doesn't lead to full automation because there are a lot of people involved in making this work. Yeah. Even if you're using agentic AI to do your quality checks, you still need to set this up and it's very cumbersome. So this idea that automation is easy and free flow and once you install, you make your company or your translation process automated, then it's super easy. This is not really the case. And I think the media has a role in informing people accurately of how this automation is implemented, not only in the industry, but for example, in a publishing house.
I understand. Okay, so we talked a bit about the AI and creativity and the podcast, but I would like to go back to our research now and the project. So how do you see your research or the project contributing to real-world practices or industries related to translation and creativity, Anna?
How would I like to see the project influencing? Sorry, I didn't get the last part.
So how do you see the research contributing to real-world practices or industries related to translation and creativity? So maybe the impact on the industry.
Well, this is in line with what I said in the first question that I have. Because of the conferences and some talks that I have given, a lot of people have talked to me about the way we measure creativity as being very useful because we don't only concentrate on errors, but we also see beyond the error-based taxonomies out there that a lot of industries use. So a lot of people that do marketing or transcreation or that they don't do something where accuracy is the main goal have reached out to me saying, I like that you give, for example, a formula to calculate creativity. So a lot of people, I think, find applicabilities, even in the creative stages that, let's say, that's a bit more of a process and not focus on the product, which is what companies really look at. How can my product be better? But I think they like this approach that they can explain to their customers that there is more in translation than only errors or that only, an automatic process.
Yeah, I see. I understand. And I'm also very curious, Shalu, how do you see that for your research?
Yeah, so I noticed that there's research showing that the quality of subtitles is degrading with the use of machine translation. And also one of our interviewees said he noticed that the language in the world is degrading. So I hope our research can make the industry or the audience notice that the effort that subtitlers are making during the translation process to make subtitles better, rather than thinking they are just using machine translation for saving times and effort. So I hope our research can make the subtitlers' efforts being recognized.
And if I may add something, this is where kiosk research and the future work packages are very relevant because we don't only look at inception, we also look at the reception. So if we can show that the majority of people, and when I say majority, this is a big word, but a lot of people prefer one thing or the other, or what are the issues that they see in engagement or in reading or in watching a video with subtitles, I think we can make more of a case that it's not only translators because it's our craft and we are picky about quality, but that it also affects the engagement of people, the users, right? The consumer, because this is what we translate for. So the work that Kyo is doing on reading reception and that our future postdoc will do on viewers' reception is also fundamental for the industry to say, oh, okay, because the industry, unfortunately, not always does large-scale reception studies because it's costly.
It's costly, yeah.
And it's difficult, yeah.
It fits so well in this project. Do you agree, Kyo?
Yeah, I think it's definitely fair. I mean, it's my project, of course, so in that sense, I'm always intuitively agreeing with it. But no, I think it's very important that we understand the impact technology has not only on text, but also on how that text then influences people, and especially consumers, so the readers or the viewers. Because it's, of course, easy to say at one point, well, we think this model works well enough, but what does that mean? And I think it is paramount that we know the impact it has on readers, how they engage with text differently. Maybe they're less engaged, maybe they're less immersed in text. That's what we found, at least so far, especially on creative segments, that they feel less, as I said, engaged. They have less empathy or sympathy with the characters. And I think it's important to notice this not only as kind of this argument the industry can use to kind of show the added value of translators, professional human translators, but also in talking of actual value, because it sounds, of course, easy to use AI, but as Anna also already said, there's a lot more process going on. Raw machine translation output is never really good enough, so you always need people who post-edit. And then, even then, post-editing, we've also seen these effects that people are less engaged and immersed. So you can also talk about the potential influences this can have on sales and popularity of translated literature across the world. So I think it's very easy to say, okay, AI, for instance, saves money or saves costs, because translators are, of course, they do add to your expenses if you're a publisher. But it's too easy, I think, to say, because bottom line, you might lose a lot of revenue for the people that actually need to be buying these books and the interest.
You lose the readers.
But also the readers need to know, right, what they are reading.
Yes, because that's also
important, that the research can show the consumer, you know, this is what happens. Maybe you should ask when you buy a book or when you watch a series, you should actively look for the quality that you want, for top quality. Or if you are not willing to pay for that, then pay less, yes, right? But not pay the same for less.
Yeah, so I think this awareness that people think that is growing, awareness people have of the use of machine translation in this and the impact it can have. I'm always reminded of this time we saw different translations of a Shakespeare poem by MT into Dutch. And the models kept getting better and better. And at one point I was like, oh, this translation is pretty good. But then we saw the actual human translation. And it was just so much better. But you don't know. Yeah, it was much richer, and it felt much more as if it was a Dutch poem rather than a poem translated from English into Dutch. But you don't know what you're missing if you don't see that difference. So I think that's a danger, perhaps, if the market's going to be flooded by machine translations, that people might not know that what they're missing. And if you can't compare it to another text, a professional human translation, you might not realize, indeed, as I said, what you're missing. So I think it's very important people are aware of the effects that machine translation can have, and that they're also aware that the publishing industries might be looking at it and might be thinking about it, and that they might indeed not necessarily take activist role, but an active role in themselves also, considering how do they approach translations and how do they approach translators also with books, but also Netflix, television, movies, news shows, these kinds of things, the impact it has on them.
Yeah, and that's also what the podcast is about the visible art of translation, right?
Yes.
And it's almost Christmas, so I thought it would be nice to ask a question in light of the Christmas spirit. So this is a little bonus question. If you could describe your PhD journey this year as a Christmas movie, what title would it have? Nastya?
So the past year, I was really focusing on writing the results of the studies we conducted. So the first thought I had was articles actually. if the audience knows the film Love Actually, so it's just that I came to realization that I not only need to analyze data and go deep into this, but also share the results with the public and write. So
That's a very nice summary of this year of your PhD journey. And how about you, Kio?
Yes, I've been thinking about this and I found it a difficult question. I went in the end with the 12 days of experimental design because, as I mentioned, it took quite a while to set it up and to make it informed and nice and strong basis. So inspired by the 12 days of Christmas, the 12 days of experimental design. That felt for me, although it was longer than 12 days, but I imagine the 12 days of Christmas also felt longer than 12 days.
And how about the project, Anna? Do you have an idea?
Well, I every Christmas when I get to Barcelona, I watch, when I arrive, Love Actually. But I didn't think that would represent the work.
Everybody watches Love Actually every year.
So I saw which were the most seen movies in Christmas, during Christmas, and I saw Die Hard as one of them. And it felt a bit like when you are a PI of a big project, it's a bit more Die Hard, and the time that you have for Love Actually is actually very small. And I tried to fit it in, the Love Actually part, but it's hard. It's Die Hard.
It's Die Hard.
So it's a lot of administration. It's a lot of pulling things together, pulling several research projects.
I understand.
Doing, teaching and admin work at the university. So it's very, very hard. And the moments of Love Actually are very, very small, but you try, or you hope, more than try. And sometimes these Love Actually moments are only in the weekends when you can actually do what you like. So I'm hoping that the Three Wise Men or Santa or Sinterklaas will bring me in the next 3 years more of Love Actually moments.
So not so much Die Hard anymore,
exactly.
More Love Actually.
Exactly.
Okay. So 2025 is almost behind us. And if we're looking ahead, what are your plans or hopes for the next year, like both in terms of your research and within the INCREC project and within the group? Jalou?
Well, I hope that next year, 2026, I can become a more mature researcher. I can be more organized, be more independent, be better at multitasking. Because next year we are going to collect data for the second work package. So we need to deal with the eye tracker, meet the participants in person, arrange the schedule for participants, find an ideal location, and fix technical problems that may happen, which can pose big challenges to my own multitasking ability. So I hope I can learn and grow up and don't get too upset if I fail in doing something.
And okay, how about you, Nastya?
So in terms of research, I'm in a similar stage as Saulu, also preparing for the work package 2 of the project. And I'm also excited and nervous about a new stage with setting up eye tracker, collecting data. But I'm also curious about what I learn next year. And I really hope to... Just as Anna was talking about the moments of love actually in research, I think I still have this, I would say, privilege of a PhD trajectory to have many moments of love actually. So I just hope to foster these moments in me and also at the same time not to forget that there are other things in life except besides the research, which can help me then come back to the research and be energetic,
more
strong
motivated.
Enough. Yeah, that's all I wanted to.
Okay, and how about you, Kio?
Yeah, purely pragmatical, I'd say. I hope to launch the survey that I was talking about and to hopefully get interesting data also for the eye tracking part we're planning with this. So I hope to launch it, get the data and analyze it with hopefully interesting results. But also in a broader sense, I hope to get a better understanding of the effect of AI on different language pairs and different languages. It's easy to kind of only look at one language pair or very broad languages or famous languages or high resource languages like English. But sometimes this idea of the promise of AI, of machine translation, is sometimes sad that it can bring up more of the peripheral languages, more of literature and culture from those languages into the other countries. But you run this risk, I think, an issue that those languages are also, they aren't that present in the data and in the training data, and those not in the models. So I'm really interested to see how this is going to affect these text and the readers of the text. So to get just a better understanding of the impact this has and the language pairs this has, and to see where these promises of AI in literature will actually be. So far, of course, we still always have new developments, new findings.
Always. That's the beauty of research.
Yeah, I'm also interested to see what that will bring with every kind of the NLP research, literary research, translation studies. Interested to see what's going to happen there, and hopefully also our own research in the next year. So hopefully interesting things to come.
Still, I'm very curious what 2026 will bring for all of us, for the project. So I think we have come to the end of the podcast. So I wanted to thank you all for sharing your experiences and reflections. It's very inspiring to hear how far you have all become. But before we finish, is there anything you would like to wish to our listeners for the holidays? Anna?
Very interesting. I just wanted to mention that there is this new album. Believe me, there is a point to what I'm going to say. There is this new album by Rosalia, who is kind of very famous Spanish artist. And in her new album, she has all these languages. And she mentioned in an interview that she had, in the beginning, Google Translate some and then realized this is not right. So I'm going to actually liaise with professional translators to be able to have top quality album, which I think after having listened to some of the songs is really, really nice album. So I wish the listeners and the users or consumers would be more aware, like Rosalia, of the value added, because everything they read and everything they watch, or a lot of the things they read and watch, are mediated by translation. And although I am 100% in agreement that tools are very useful when you travel, you use your Google Translate if you go to China and you don't have Chinese, but the value added to the quality of their product is really improved by professional translators.
Definitely. I do understand. I think this is a beautiful note to end on this podcast. So I think we've learned a lot today about your project, about your research, and even though I know the project, I've learned a lot. So thank you all for joining us today and telling me and our listeners about your research. And there's one thing left to say, and I would say, happy holidays and wishing you a happy new year.
Feliz Navidad.
Do we have more languages?
S Rождеством.
新年快乐.
Vrolijk kerstfeest.
What do you say?
Gelukkige feestdagen.
Fijne feestdagen.
Een zalig kerstfeest.
Thank you again to our invited speaker and to our listeners. Thank you for being there, and feel free to share our podcasts with your family, friends, and colleagues. This is part of a series of podcasts of the EU-funded INCREC project. So follow us for more episodes and please share your comments on this platform. See you next time.